right, friends. I am thrilled that we have Asha Rangappa. I hope I didn't do violence to your last name.
You didn't. Perfect.
Former FBI agent, lawyer herself. She teaches at Yale. Her academic credentials are crazy impressive, far more impressive than mine. But I'm not going to go through them now because I really want to jump right into a conversation with Asha. And let me tell you, I've been meaning to do this for about 2 years now. I've been dying to talk to you ever since you and I were asked to be on a panel that was put together by Representative Eric Swalwell, and he called it Representative Swalwell in Conversation with the Justice League. Yep. And I felt special. I felt like I should have a mask. You should be wearing a cape. And it was a great event. It was a great discussion. A couple of years ago, it was about the need for, among other things, a presidential crimes commission to try to grab hold of all of the crimes and corruption that we have been seeing in the harsh light of day for years now. And who would have thought 2 years later, we don't seem to be any farther along on the accountability front for Donald Trump or his corrupt associates. But maybe we're getting there with some of the recent developments. Now, I saw that you tweeted yesterday that the January 6th committee's vocal frustration with DOJ does not give me confidence that Garland has been working closely with the committee and is on top of everything. And that was wonderfully circumspect and restrained that you said it doesn't give you confidence. Every day, I have to balance my extreme frustration, sometimes boiling over into anxiety, with the need for patience, particularly when it comes to the DOJ's investigation of all things insurrection. That's unlike anything DOJ has tackled before. So I get it. But so when I saw you tweet that, I responded, and all I could come up with, and I wish I had more characters on Twitter, was that one possible explanation is that we all know that there are some members of Congress who, in a number of ways, large and small, were somehow involved in the insurrection. You know, maybe from the relatively benign, but just really distasteful and un-American, to the full-blown co-conspirator in a conspiracy to commit offenses against the United States, and probably everywhere in between. So it makes some sense to me that the Department of Justice can't be business as usual, coordinating with the congressional committee the way we generally see when both organizations have an interest. Congress has to investigate, DOJ, the prosecutors, have to investigate, and you don't want to step on each other's toes and sort of create problems for the two records that develop over time. All of that is a long-winded way of now asking you, based on your tweet and based on where we are, do you think Merrick Garland and the Department of Justice are actively involved in a criminal investigation of Trump and company, the command structure of the insurrection?
When I think about this question, Glenn, I have to believe they are. I mean, I don't know how they could not be, because I believe that they would be duty bound to be investigating it. Whether or not they ultimately charge is a separate question. That depends on what they gather during the course of the investigation. But I really don't see how there would be any rationale or basis to simply not look further. I don't know how you could watch what we watched on January 6th and not do that. However, like you, all of the outward indications that you would, imagine would be taking place, we haven't seen. It's been 16 months since January 6th. And to the point of the cooperation, I think you make a great point that there could be people implicated in Congress itself. However, I would still think that with many of the other witnesses, for example, that have come forward, like you'd want deconfliction, and you don't want to run into the problems that the special counsel or the independent counsel did in Iran-Contra, for example, where criminal prosecutions got compromised because of what was happening on the committee. So, oh my God, sorry about that.
No worries.
So I'm not sure what to make of it. And, I think that even if you were to say that the very, very central players, Trump, people in the White House, members of Congress, that would have to be a super close hold investigation where everything over it was left to the last minute. I mean, I don't feel like we've seen movement on people like the fake electors or Jeffrey Clark at the Department of Justice, which seems like kind of low-hanging fruit. I mean, he was there, like that's a person within their own, you know, it's inside the house, as it were. So I'm not sure what to make of it. What do you think?
We are kindred justice spirits, because when you started out with, how could they not be investigating? You know, DOJ was my professional home for nearly quarter of a century of my 30 years as a prosecutor. I can't envision the hierarchy, the Merrick Garlands, who I still have faith and confidence in his judgment, in his ethics, in his grounding in the law. I don't know, I've met him, I've spoken with him, I don't know him personally, but I have so many close friends and colleagues who actively worked cases with him. And they say, trust me, he's the real deal and he's going to get there. I trust these people, I trust their opinions. Lisa Monaco, the deputy, you know, I interviewed her when she was applying to be a prosecutor at the DC U.S. Attorney's Office, and she was an outstanding young prosecutor when she joined our office. I can't imagine these people being willing to give our republic away to Donald Trump and his corrupt associates, which is precisely what will happen if they're not held accountable criminally, because that will send the signal that what they did is okay. And the next corrupt president will do it, and then some. So I cannot fathom that DOJ is not prosecuting. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, you know, one possible factor is that this is just so large that the capacity for the Department of Justice to handle it may be strained. I mean, you know, there are thousands, or at least close to 1,000, maybe more, of just the ground level minions who trespassed at the Capitol and to varying degrees engaged in crimes. So, you know, I think that there could be a resource problem of simply moving up the ladder, if you will. You know, if you compare it to, for example, the special counsel investigation into Donald Trump and Russia. I mean, you're talking about a pretty limited universe of people. So, I mean, that could be an issue, though. I feel like what frustrates me, Glenn, is that you knew that. I mean, you knew that this was going to be probably the largest investigation in the history of the Department of Justice. And so I'm not clear why there was never, and I mean, I guess I need to let this go, but I get riled up about it, why there was never a special counsel appointed to really handle that core center organizational command structure, and maybe leave the rest of the prosecutions to main justice.
Well, and this has convinced me more than ever that we need a standing independent counsel, first statute, and then a permanent independent counsel office to, as best we can, take politics out of criminal investigations. I don't suspect that's going to happen, but you know, as you say, how can they not be? But also, as you say, we see no outward signs of it, right? Because I refer to the outward signs as the leakers, the liars, and the lawyers, right? You have guys, and the liars, I always use somebody like George Papadopoulos, right? We put him in the grand jury. He's going to come out and lie to the cameras, and they're trying to beat me up and make me say things that are untrue and blah, blah, blah. Those are the liars. And as you know, grand jury secrecy rules apply to me. They apply to you. When you were with the FBI, they apply to the grand jurors, but they don't apply to witnesses. So witnesses can come out and lie to the public all they want. And that's often what happens when we're trying to investigate quietly and covertly, but we're putting people in the grand jury. Well, we run the risk of them running their mouths and outing the fact that we have this grand jury investigation up and running. And if it's not the liars like George Papadopoulos, it's their lawyers, because everybody wants to pound their chest and say, I have the biggest witness. The white collar bar in DC is famous for, wanting to claim they have the most important witness in a major federal investigation. So the lawyers tend to talk. And then you've got the leakers, and the leakers are everywhere. The leakers can be in the FBI. They can be in DOJ among the prosecutors. They can be the staff at the Department of Justice, an organization 110, 115,000 people strong. It's hard not to have leaks happen from time to time. So the lawyers, the leakers, and the liars, we would know if they were putting people in the grand jury. So it kind of takes us back to how can they be investigating if they're not following the usual investigative blueprint?
Right. And there are also, speaking of things that are just out in public view, there's also the contempt referrals that, we haven't really seen movement on either. And so that is really concerning, because if there's really not going to be teeth to those contempt referrals, then you're also stymieing potentially the committee investigation. So I don't know if do you have thoughts on what the holdup is on that front?
We are on day 105 of the Mark Meadows indictment watch.
Yes.
Of course, it took 22 days for them to act on the congressional referral and indict Steve Bannon.
Right.
And, as we know, the law says that once Congress makes a referral for contempt of Congress, the relevant U.S. attorney shall present the matter to the grand jury for its action. Doesn't mean the grand jury has to indict, but it's a mandatory shall. The U.S. attorney must present it to the grand jury. Why has it been 105 days and we've heard nothing about Mark Meadows? It could be that the DOJ leadership is involved in endless hand-wringing and legal navel-gazing, trying to figure out if they have any concerns about indicting a former chief of staff to the president. Are there any, there are these OLC memos that seem determined to put certain classes of government officials above the law, like a sitting criminal president. And there are some about absolute immunity, which I hope people understand is not a thing. Read Judge Bates' opinion from the George W. Bush, Harriet Miers days. Absolute immunity is not a thing. But even more fundamentally, if we continue to try to put high government officials above the law, then we're going the way of Russia.
Right. And Glenn, I think that to the legal navel gazing point, I mean, we are now in a place where some of these ideas are just going to have to be tested. And DOJ is just going to have to take the risk of failure, because when you are dealing with crimes committed by the President of the United States, there are going to be unique legal defenses, privileges, immunities that are going to come into play. You're not going to get a constitutionally squeaky clean legal issue. They're all going to be complicated. So at some point, you just need to bite the bullet and bring it. And guess what? If a court decides that executive privilege applies to Mark Meadows, then so be it. At least at least you start to create some of the parameters, not only of this investigation, but you create some legal parameters that then maybe Congress might be able to address later on with other legislation. I mean, there are policy issues that need to be filled as well. This is what we talked about in the Justice League. But we never know what gaps need to be filled if we never test them and know what those gaps are.
I am so with you. We need to take some maiden legal voyages. I mean, there are people saying that we can't prosecute a criminal former president because it's never been done before and there's no precedent. Then the logical conclusion is you can never do it regardless of how dramatic the crimes are. That doesn't make any sense. I don't know what your experience was when you were with the FBI. My experience as a federal prosecutor and a local prosecutor, because I was both in DC, because DC is the only one of the 94 US attorneys' offices that prosecutes all the federal cases and all the local cases. So I got to see both practices. And what I came to learn is that the traditional federal prosecution practice is very, very cautious and slow and risk averse. And most of the time there's dual jurisdiction. So if the Fed sees something that they're not really enamored of, it's not a really strong case, let's just go ahead and give it to the states. Let's make it the state's problem. But this is a federal problem. Donald Trump shouldn't be Georgia's problem or New York State's problem. It's a federal problem and we need a federal solution.
And I mean, let's get to really what is the role of a federal prosecutor? It's to vindicate the people of the United States when a harm has been done to the people of the United States. And in this case, the victim, I mean, more so than in any discrete crime, the victim here were the American people. I mean, the attack was on our seat of, democracy. And so I agree with you that there is a substantial federal interest here that should not be pawned off on the states. I mean, there was a point a while ago before January 6th happened that I thought, and I'm now blanking on what crimes might have had state jurisdiction, but maybe these can be, states can pick up the baton. But after January 6th, I don't think that DOJ can evade this. I think they should be investigating everything. And by the way, just so we don't forget, the statute of limitations on obstruction of justice from the Mueller investigation is is expiring with regard to several of the 10 incidents that were outlined in the report. We haven't heard boo from Merrick Garland about that either.
Yeah.
And that is what adds to my skepticism about this investigation, because I feel like someone who really understands the need or kind of how important this is to the public would be making a public statement about any decision on that front, even if it's the decision of, I've looked at this again, we're not going to move on it. I think he owes that to the American people. And the fact that he's just, where's Waldo right now? It's just not.
And I try to remember that the attack on our democracy, the attempt to overturn the election by a sitting president who lost, is so big and so unprecedented and so novel that it's going to take a lot of time for DOJ to get its arms around it and be prepared to start indicting the upper echelon of the, command structure, not just the foot soldiers who frankly were just following Donald Trump's orders. Doesn't mean they didn't act criminally, but I believe it's a mitigator. My president told me my vote was stolen. My president told me if I don't go down there and fight like hell, I won't have a country. And he said, go down there and stop the certification. He used the word steal, which helps provide his corrupt intent. So, but as you just pointed out, there's a tell. And the tell here is that we've got campaign finance violations and a conspiracy to steal the election by committing campaign finance laws in concert with Michael Cohen, and nothing, right? We've got up to 10 potential obstruction of justice charges meticulously documented by Bob Mueller in Volume 2 of the Trump-Russia report, and we've got nothing. We've got a pretty easy case, I believe, for bribery and extortion of Zelensky. We've got witness tampering. We've got obstructing official proceedings every time he told his executive branch officials, do not comply with lawfully issued congressional subpoenas. We've got crime after crime after crime. Many of them could be indicted separately from the insurrection. So why have we seen zero accountability? That is what gives me the frustration and the anxiety with respect to waiting it out for indictments for the insurrection.
Yeah. So what about, just to play devil's advocate against ourselves for your viewers, you mentioned one reason that this could be, so at least for the January 6th piece, it still doesn't explain all these other things that you just mentioned, but the fact that this just, this is so sprawling across not just, Trump and the White House, but members of Congress, that they just have to keep this super under wraps until they're really ready to unleash the backlash that's going to inevitably come. There's the resource problem. We know that Lisa Monaco announced that they're hiring, I think, 161 more prosecutors. So, which suggests that they get that they're going to have to be picking up the pace and moving, and there's more that they need to look into. Other reasons that we can give that will give them the benefit. Investigations take time. I think, that's an important thing to put out there. And, it's not law and order. It has been 16 months. I think you'd still be further along maybe, but but to give them the benefit of the doubt, these do take time, and these are complex crimes, especially if they're looking at something like seditious conspiracy and tying it to Trump. They would need to be able to tie him to the intention for the use of force against the Capitol. Any others?
I think it boils down to they're trying to make sure that if they try to take out the king, that they're successful. And there's a reason some prosecutors, federal prosecutors, go around boasting that they've never lost a case. It's because they only bring the sure things. We know nothing's a sure thing, but I think they are analyzing this perhaps to death, and they want to make sure that if they do it, when they do it, they can't fail, or maybe they can't fail -1, and they're willing to take that 1% risk. I can't find like really principled, tactical, and especially public safety reasons to continue to wait to bring these indictments. And let's shift over to this for the last few minutes. Do you think the opinion, because we're talking about, well, they really have to prove the case against Donald Trump. Do you think the opinion by the California federal judge, was it David Carter, moves the needle, impresses the Department of Justice when, a member of the very same federal bench that Merrick Garland sat on for 24 years, the federal judiciary writ large, just made some blockbuster findings? And for the people who haven't had an opportunity to, digest the judge's 44-page opinion, let me just read a couple of sentences that kind of highlight things. The judge said on page 36, based on the evidence, the court finds it more likely than not that President Trump corruptly attempted to obstruct the joint session of Congress on January 6, 2021. And he also covered the base of corrupt intent, which some analysts and commentators seem to think is the unicorn of our criminal practice. It's not. I spent 30 years in courtrooms proving corrupt intent with far less evidence than we have against Donald Trump. And Judge Carter said, because President Trump likely knew that the plan to disrupt the electoral count was wrongful, his mindset exceeds the threshold for acting corruptly. And let me just two more passages real quickly. He said that the court finds it more likely than not that President Trump and John Eastman dishonestly conspired to obstruct the joint session of Congress. And then he finishes up at the end by saying Eastman and Trump launched a campaign to overturn a democratic election, an action unprecedented in American history. And it goes on. Here's what I want to ask. And we want it to move the Department of Justice, but I don't know that it will. But what I hope people get is that we arrest and indict people based on probable cause. That is a lesser evidentiary showing than a preponderance of the evidence, more likely than not. And a federal judge just said Donald Trump, by a preponderance of the evidence, committed federal crimes to overturn the election. How can that not move the Department of Justice?
Yes, and to clarify, Glenn, you mean move them to actually start taking action as in charging, because if they haven't moved on investigating by now, then we are in big trouble. I mean, that investigation that ship sailed a long time ago. Like that, they need to be 16 months along in that investigation. I think that what that opinion does is it shapes, I think first it validates the public who have been sitting here. I mean, to have a federal judge, this isn't somebody who's partisan and who has any kind of vested interest. He was looking at the evidence that he had in front of him. And so I think there's sort of an objective assessment that creates, that is validating, I think, to the public who is just, I mean, I know I'm sitting here like, am I missing something? Did I imagine what happened on January 6th? And hopefully maybe that will to the extent that they're navel gazing or worried about optics or looking partisan will help, that it will kind of reaffirm the Department of Justice in its actions. Does that make sense? I mean, I suspect that one thing, in addition to trying to create the airtight case and address every legal aspect, is perhaps just an overcautiousness about optics and looking partisan, which is another reason that if that's the case, they should have just appointed a special counsel. But I mean, I think it can move the needle maybe in that way of providing like an objective imprimatur of the evidence.
And what do you think our options are, we the people, if the Department of Justice, for whatever reason, declines to hold Donald Trump and the command structure of the insurrection accountable criminally? I mean, I will say, and I always hesitate to do this because it feels like a reach or hyperbole, you know, prosecutors have an obligation to faithfully execute the laws of the country, to hold criminals accountable if the evidence supports bringing a charge. There's actually a federal crime of accessory after the fact. If you know a crime has been committed against the United States and you do anything to assist the perpetrator in avoiding apprehension or punishment, you're kind of committing a crime yourself. I'm not accusing the Department of Justice of that, but I mean, if this was a local sheriff's office and the sheriff's brother was out there doing crime and the sheriff's like, I'm not going after my brother, wouldn't we do something about it? I know that's not a perfect parallel, but I don't think there's a good answer to the question, but what in the world can we do beyond vote?
I think the difficulty, Glenn, is that we just have no information on which to take action, right? I mean, you know, the benefit of, say, the Mueller investigation is that there was some accountability. There had to be a reporting. There had to be an explanation of a declination of charges. Where what right now, the way it stands, it's a black hole. So we kind of have to wait because, you know, maybe they're investigating. It's going to take time. And at what point does it become too late? At what point does it become just unreasonable that we haven't seen something? By the way, I wanted to mention, again, in this devil's advocate category, I do think that one thing that may be reassuring, and this was an argument that Terry Canfield made, is that if there were really not going to move or not doing something, we might see more resignations. That, you know, the people at the Department of Justice, I know the people at the Department of Justice, even if the people at the top were paralyzed with some kind of fear of optics, the rank and file would not be going along with that. I think that there are too many people who care about accountability. And we saw that in New York. The same thing happened. So what can we do? I don't know. I mean, I think the problem is there's no deadline. There's no deadline at which point we will have the information unless they choose to move forward with actually bringing charges.
We are always looking for those justice crumbs, right? To eat, like, well, you know, there would be, and I'm with you and I'm with Terry. I think Terry does great stuff and she is always a little bit more on the optimistic and circumspect front, and she's great. And I tend to lose my patience and get a little frustrated from time to time. But you can, you know, we just kind of scarf up the justice crumbs like, well, there would be resignations and there, you know, but, you know, that it doesn't feel like enough given where we are, given the imminent threat to public safety. You know, I'll kind of finish with this, but, you know, there were lots of times when we had to decide when to take down a covert investigation. And once we had probable cause, yes, we always wanted to build our case stronger. But once we had probable cause, we had to ask ourselves every day, are we endangering the public if we don't do the takedown right now? And I'm going to tell you, I was a public safety guy. Make my work tougher in court and at trial, I'm fine with that. I'm not going to leave folk out in the community to hurt others if I know I have probable cause and I can begin to make arrests, return indictments. So we know, not only do we know, Asha, that we've had probable cause on any number of crimes for a very long time, we now have it, according to a federal judge, by a preponderance of the evidence, well above probable cause. So I am hoping somehow that moves the needle and we begin to see indictments sooner rather than later.
And just to add, can I just add one point to
Please.
what you're saying, which is I completely agree with you that time is of the essence, because the crime is actually ongoing. I mean, Trump is now engaged in an effort to somehow retroactively invalidate the election. I think and the judge said this too, that we're asking for another January 6th of some kind to happen again. So, I don't think that the Department of Justice has the luxury to necessarily be so methodical as it wants to be, and that sending the public message actually has a deterrent effect, which is really important for the country at this moment.
Yeah. Well, I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed and found cathartic our conversation. I feel like we are seeing these issues the same way, and we're not finding a lot of satisfactory answers, but we have to keep asking the questions, and we have to keep, I was a prosecutor for 30 years, and I had to make a lot of prosecutorial decisions, and I never let public pressure sway me one way or another. So it's a little counterintuitive to say we have to keep making our voices heard, and maybe the Department of Justice will hear us. They're supposed to tune us out.
Yeah.
But, we are kind of the ones with a real stake in this, and we're the ones whose democracy is hanging in the balance. So I don't think you can shut us up, and I don't think we should shut up about this.
We're all the
we
victims.
are victims. Yeah. Yeah. So
Looking
thank
forward
you so much, Asha. I am not going to wait another 2 years before I pull you back in and have another conversation. And I'm sure we're going to see lots of developments, hopefully in the aftermath of Judge Carter's decision. And hopefully we can talk again soon.
I would love that. Thanks so much, Glenn.